Okay, we're back. Don't say we're streaming, but it's okay. Mm-mm. I'll probably do this. Most evil athletes. This one was eyeing me yesterday too. Looks interesting. Y'all can see this. This one's been eyeing me. I say we watch this. Alright, we're watching this. I'll be right back. Got some shit. Alright, oh fuck, my headphones aren't connected. Oh fuck, they were. Never mind. Alright, we gotta set up everything. Please. Yes. Alright.
Right. Just like when things are packed tidy and tight.
We're good. We're good. We're good. All right. Okay. Start recording. Oh my gosh. Someone's being loud upstairs. It's okay, we're good. My nose is a bit itchy. Okay. Hello, YouTube. So, yeah, restart the recording. Alright. Alright. This video
Sometimes
looks
I
pretty interesting. Why the Middle... Fuck. Okay. Why the Middle Ages were a paradise for psychopaths. This one seems interesting. I just woke up. We're gonna watch this.
watch old movies and I wonder, like, before cameras and DNA forensics and everything we have now, wasn't it way easier to get away with crime? Which led me to also wonder, how would you even catch a criminal in, say, the Middle Ages, unless you literally caught him red-handed, which finally led me to a single conclusion: damn, medieval Europe must have been a fantastic place to be a complete psychopath. I mean, think about it. This is a world where your entire identity is based on oaths and what other people think of you from a reputation perspective. So if you're a psychopath, let's just get a loose definition here, that means you don't really have a conscience the way other people do.
Just imagine how evil people would be if we just didn't have all the technology we have now. Like, it really puts into perspective how some people would be moving. Because, you know, people be like, you know, if the purge were to happen, you know, everyone would be like going crazy and doing shit, you know, or like if the world was going to end because, you know, no one like cares about the law or whatever. I wouldn't say this would be like the same, but it would be pretty similar, you know, if all of a sudden we just lost all the technology that helped us like identify criminals, like it would like reset back to the medieval ages. Like people would be evil. There would be the crime rates would go up. It would be insane. Well, obviously, you know, that's like no shit, but it's just kind of cool to think about.
You don't feel empathy or guilt, and you don't show the physiological stress responses that the rest of us can't really suppress when we lie. Modern psychology actually has a name for this general profile. Maybe you've heard of the dark triad, which is narcissism, Machiavellianism, the obsessive need to control and manipulate, and then psychopathy, which comes with all the behavioral and biological signatures I just described. That alarm system that goes off in your brain when you're caught in a lie, like when your stomach drops, that just doesn't fire in a person that has these traits. I'm simplifying things a bit here, but medieval society was essentially held together by two things: mutual trust and a mutual fear of God. If you didn't care about any of that, you could just kind of be a monster. I mean, look at Thomas de Maure. He was a pretty prominent French lord in the early 12th century, and on paper, he was kind of the ideal knight. He was a war hero, veteran of the First Crusade. He actually fought at the Siege of Jerusalem. I mean, I can't really imagine the things this guy saw. So Thomas gets back from Crusade, and he gets in with this whole class of castle-holding nobles who are terrorizing the lands of King Louis VI, also known as Louis the Fat, which is kind of a mean name for somebody who is just trying to impose order. Also, just a side note, for much of the Middle Ages, the figure of the king hadn't developed into this strong, centralized source of power yet, especially in France. So the king was constantly struggling with the noble lords for power, and that was pretty par for the course. Now, out of this terrible crew of nobles who was giving Louis problems, Thomas was by far the worst. During this period, the whole idea of chivalry was kind of being born. The church was pushing movements like the peace of God that basically established that a knight should never attack churches or the people inside them, you know, clergy, women, peasants, anybody who can't defend themselves. And the way the church enforced the peace of God was the threat of excommunication. So if you break the peace and attack innocent people, you get excommunicated. And if you die excommunicated, well, as far as anybody in the Middle Ages was concerned, that was basically a one-way ticket to hell. But wouldn't you be totally immune to that if you just didn't believe in hell or you didn't really care the way everyone else did?
That's another thing. Like, so much laws were just enforced through religious ideologies. So, like, if you just weren't religious and you didn't care enough, then a lot of shit just didn't affect you back then, it feels like. So that's also a pretty interesting thing to think about.
He just ignored all of it. The clergy weren't safe, pilgrims got plundered on the road. He loved terrorizing peasants from the villages of rival lords, sort of a weekend hobby for him to let off some steam. We actually have a first-hand account from a monk named Guibert of Nogent, who was unlucky enough to live near Thomas, and he wrote about him with this insane, genuine horror. There are certain tortures Guibert describes Thomas doing that I can't mention here because of the YouTube content filter, which should give you a pretty good idea of what we're dealing with. What I can tell you is that he liked to hang guys up by their thumbs and by other things, and he would often leave prisoners in his dungeons to starve to death. What's interesting is, like I said, the whole idea of the chivalrous knight is developing at this time. So contemporary writers use Thomas as the poster child for everything a chivalrous knight shouldn't be. A knight was supposed to embody wisdom and charity and loyalty and honor, and Thomas was the representation of pride, false swearing, lechery, and treason. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, how does anybody get away with this for decades, even in the Middle Ages? Well, you could just kind of swear.
Because they had no way to document this shit.
Swear an oath that you wouldn't do it anymore, and then even if you did start doing it again quietly, communicate.
Well, I mean, it was being documented, so I don't know why I just said that. Never mind.
Was slow and information kind of moved at a trickle, so you could usually get away with it for a while. Also, if you're biologically incapable of feeling fear or guilt, then really an oath is just words. You're basically immune to medieval society's primary law enforcement mechanism. But the big question still remains here, why was medieval society so vulnerable to these personality types? Like, people were smart and perceptive then too. Nobody noticed the big old blind spot here.
Well, because you had to get a bunch of people to believe your side. And not everyone is, smart, especially back then.
The problem was that they actually couldn't. Medieval philosophy had this concept called synderesis, which was written about extensively by thinkers like Albertus Magnus, who you might know as Thomas Aquinas' teacher. Synderesis is the absolute belief that God has hardwired a moral compass into every single human soul. It's the divine spark, the natural weight that's constantly pulling every man, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, towards the good, towards the light of the Lord. Now, we understand from modern psychology that not everybody feels the pull of conscience the same way. Synderesis is basically saying the exact opposite, that everybody does have the same conscience installed by God. So no matter how wicked a man is, deep down he still feels guilt like everyone else. To the medieval mind, a human being without a conscience was a biological and theological impossibility, so it wasn't even conceived of. It's the perfect camouflage, and if you're a Patrick Bateman type maneuvering through high medieval society, you could just fake the entire language of honor. I've mentioned this in other videos, but public displays of emotion, weeping at mass, these big dramatic acts of piety were seen as proof of how serious you were about God. So the psychopath could just perform. You weep on cue, you kiss the relic, the wolf stays hidden in sheep's clothing. You might be imagining this whole scenario playing out in some isolated farming village, the type of place most people lived in the Middle Ages, and it did, and we'll get there. But sometimes two apex predators at the top of the food chain would be pulling this on each other, and it would become this high-level game of chicken, which I guess is what politics still is today.
Presentamos Grammarly, tu herramienta integral de redacción como nunca antes la habías visto. Conoce.
I mean, just look at the bitter, decades-long rivalry between the handsome ginger King Henry II of England and King Louis VII of...
Nothing about that guy looks fucking handsome. Excuse me. Jeez.
France in the 12th century. They got caught up in this constant cycle of brutal border wars that could only be ended by these massive, highly emotional peace summits. And I mean, they're both weeping and swearing holy oaths of eternal brotherhood on sacred relics. They're exchanging the kiss of peace in front of God and the assembled nobility of both kingdoms. And then a few weeks later, they're breaking the oaths without a second thought whenever it becomes politically convenient. Henry's own sons, Richard and John, repeatedly swore fealty to their grandfather, and then teamed up with the French, first with Louis and then with his even craftier son Philip Augustus, to hunt Henry down, which caused him a ton of problems near the end of his life. So it's like for everyone else, the oath is a cosmic contract, but if you're at the top, you're really only upholding it because breaking it might trigger consequences you can't control. That actually might be kind of the worst part of all of it, because it means the system's biggest vulnerability wasn't just for a few hidden monsters. The entire class running the system kind of understood that the sacred stuff was negotiable while everybody else was staking their entire lives on it. And then it's kind of a slippery slope from there, because if you're thinking that way, then a peace treaty is really just a convenient way to get all of your unarmed enemies into one room. But I want to go back to Synderesis and the medieval scholars for a second. You're telling me, John, that not even someone as smart as Thomas Aquinas figured out that there were a few people floating around without the same conscience as everyone else? Well, actually, kind of, and of course it was Aquinas who came up with it. He worked through this whole categorization of evil, and he concluded that normal people sin in two understandable ways. They sin out of ignorance, or they sin out of passion. So weakness, rage, temptation, crimes committed in the heat of the moment. Medieval society would of course punish those sins, but it could also comprehend them, and to a certain extent it could forgive them. But then Aquinas actually carved out a third category for a type of person that hadn't even really been conceived of before: the people who sin ex militia, from malice. Or as he put it, the people who sin with certain knowledge. This is the cold-hearted, clear-headed killer who's planning it ahead of time and knows exactly what he's doing. He's not blinded by rage. It's not like this moment of temptation, or he comes home and he catches his wife in bed with a local jester. This is what we would describe today as pathological behavior. Aquinas said that these types know exactly what the laws of God and man are, and they just run a little cost-benefit analysis and choose to do the atrocity anyway, because the payout in land or gold or power outweighs the spiritual penalty that they probably don't believe in anyway. The problem with all of this is that by the time theologians were starting to come to terms with the idea of this type of person existing, these psychopaths were already embedded deep in a system that basically rewarded them. Because in a lot of ways, the feudal system kind of selected in favor of guys like Thomas de Marle. There's this great medievalist, Chris Wickham. If you haven't read his book, Medieval Europe, I highly recommend it. He writes that feudal society was essentially built on the constant threat of violence. Violence that the lords could perpetrate on the peasants with armed men, violence from peasant uprisings, etc., etc. So people who were genuinely afraid of violence had little chance of long or successful lives, and they usually ended up joining the church if they could. But men who weren't afraid to do a little violence were at a huge advantage. I think there's a risk here that we can read someone like Thomas the wrong way. There's this misconception that psychopaths are just totally out of their minds and foaming at the mouth or whatever. It's actually scarier, at least in my opinion, because Thomas was totally level-headed and rational. He's the type of guy Thomas Aquinas is talking about. In 1114, a church council formally condemned him, anathematized him, which means banished him from the church, and stripped him of his knightly belt. But he just didn't show up to this ceremony. Louis the Fat personally led armies against his castles, and even with all of this, it still took decades because Thomas was a landed lord in a system that was designed to protect violent landed lords, and he had multiple castles and a whole crew of highly trained armed men around him. He actually wasn't finished off until 1130, when he was mortally wounded while being captured, but that was after 30 years of basically doing whatever he wanted. Now, I know Thomas has kind of been the main character of this video, but I'm still wondering, what if you had all of these traits, but you weren't born into the nobility? You were a peasant like 80% of the population was for most of the Middle Ages. Also, new merch is now live. We have the Chronically Online Crusader t-shirt, as well as the OG medieval
my fault. All right, we're good.
Club, weekly essays on cool medieval history stuff, Q&As with yours now. A lot of Europe was covered in dense forests. Word of anything could take weeks to travel, which was bad news if you were trying to get a letter delivered to your beloved, but great news if you were a sociopathic peasant who wanted to travel to a new town and steal someone's identity. Because couldn't you just say you were whoever, and if you were smart enough and confident enough, nobody would have any way to prove you right or wrong? Now, I just said sociopath instead of psychopath, so quick distinction, and this is the pop psychology version, roughly speaking. A psychopath is usually born, not made, while a sociopath is usually made, not born, and they're more impulsive. They're kind of running on the pure audacity of the act, but with the same delusions of grandeur and that parasitic instinct, which brings us to the false Baldwin of 1225.
I'm in high school and I have absolutely no idea what I want to do for my career. And that's what I would have said if I never used
Baldwin IX, the Count of Flanders, gets crowned Emperor of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. Then he mysteriously vanishes into a Bulgarian prison and nobody ever finds out what happened to him. 20 years later, a random guy dressed in rags comes wandering out of the woods in Flanders, an awfully long way from Bulgaria, claiming to be Baldwin. Through sheer confidence, he basically pulls it off. I mean, towns declared their support for him, nobles kneeled to him.
Damn. Imagine just faking being someone back then. You know how easy that would be? As long as you, like, just looked close enough. Like, have y'all seen that one, like, hood Mr. Beast dude? Imagine back then if, like, those two, if they were two, like, people that existed, and let's say Mr. Beast still had some sort of, like, fame, that dude could really just come in and claim he was Mr. Beast if something happened. That's kind of crazy. Imagine people thinking, like, someone died, and then the whole time they just weren't fucking dead, you know? And, well, to them, fuck, wait, hold up. Well, fuck, run back that scenario. Imagine someone dies. And, okay. Imagine someone dies, right? And everyone thinks they're dead, and then just someone who looks like them, just a bit. You know, it's just a bit, because people, like, were running off of memory. No one had pictures, you know? Just comes in and it's like, oh yeah, I'm this person. I never actually died. Y'all are fools. Now, listen to my role. That, like, people could just do that.
He even sparked a full-blown rebellion against Baldwin's actual daughter, Countess Joan, and he came pretty close to taking control of Flanders with basically nothing but a made-up identity. I kind of wonder how he felt when he realized people were actually going for it. Like, was he thinking, wow, I can't believe this is working? Or was he like, yes, this is exactly what should be happening? I'm not a sociopath, so I'm not sure how that internal monologue goes. Or am I? Anyway, finally, the King of France sits him down and asks him a few simple questions, which you would think he would have done some research on. You know, where were you knighted? Where did you do homage? Obviously, fake Baldwin can't answer these questions and the whole house of cards comes crashing down. All it took was literally one straightforward conversation. He was executed soon after, and later they found out that he was most likely a wandering minstrel named Bertrand de Vray. There's also the famous case of Martin Guerre from 1556, which is technically a little outside the Middle Ages, but to a French peasant, 1556 wasn't much different than 1456 or 1356, so we'll roll with it. There's this guy, Arnaud Duty, and he wanders into an isolated French village claiming to be Martin Guerre, a local fella who abandoned his family and disappeared years before. Just like fake Baldwin, he's so confident that everyone just kind of buys it and accepts him into the community. I mean, who would pretend to be Martin Guerre? He even fools Martin's family, which is definitely the fishy part. Like, wouldn't they recognize that he isn't Martin? Apparently he looked vaguely similar and knew some details about Martin's life, but still. Fake Martin, aka Martin 2.0, aka Morton, takes over Martin's wife and his property and basically his whole life for years, which again, the wife had to be in on it somehow, but we'll leave that for now. Eventually, people get to talking and fake Martin, aka Morton, is put on trial as an imposter. But for a little while, it seems like he's gonna win the case, until one day, the doors swing open and the real Martin Guerre comes limping into the courtroom on a wooden leg, back from the wars. You probably think I'm making this whole thing up, but this is exactly why history rules. It's better than anything you or I could come up with. This was unfortunately essentially game over for fake Martin, and just like fake Baldwin, he was executed soon after, which seems harsh, but I don't make the rules. The point is, whether you were a peasant or a noble or a sociopath or a psychopath, medieval society basically had these massive vulnerabilities that were waiting to be exploited. With that said, let's put the finishing touches on this medieval masterpiece. Sometimes I see people online yearning for the medieval world. I've been guilty of this myself. You know, when life was simple, when
Yeah, there's like a lot of good, like, pluses to, like, I guess society, but a lot of people, like, view them, I feel like, just like stuff that would benefit them, not society. Like, society was still worse back then. Like, yeah, maybe like community was better and stuff, But there's still a bunch of major downsides to the medieval world that this is like society today like does better in. Though obviously I'm not saying that today's society is great or anything. I'm just saying that it's definitely better than the medieval times by a long shot.
Big tech wasn't spying on you all the time, when you ate what you grew and died if it got too cold out. Honestly, I get it. The past can seem like this beautiful foreign country that you'll never get to visit, and that kind of sucks. But there are massive advantages and disadvantages to living in any time period, and I hate to break it to you, but you were probably born in the right era. This romantic view of the Middle Ages gets tied up with like King Arthur and chivalry and knights and princesses, but look at the reality. Chivalry, for example, existed because the church needed to put a leash on a heavily armed, militarily trained, highly violent upper class. Or I guess in other words, it existed because of the Thomas de Marles of the world, not in spite of them. All of this, of course,
PTSD back then too. War veterans were probably so much more violent.
begs one final question, which is if these same personality types exist today, which of course they do, what vulnerabilities in our society are they exposing? Let me know in the comments. As always, I'm John, this has been Medieval Mindset, and remember, the past isn't gone. It's simply waiting to be rediscovered.
Wise words. It's a nice video, Medieval Mindset. So I assume this guy just makes everything like about medieval society. Cool. It's an interesting video.
Unless you literally caught him red-handed, which finally led me to a single conclusion: damn, medieval Europe must have been a fantastic place to be a complete psychopath. I mean, think about it. This is a world where your entire identity
Alright. So we need to like properties, filters. Do we have to turn the threshold down? I'm just gonna turn threshold down on some stuff. There we go. So if I'm over here, you can still hear me talking. Alright, pretty smooth. There we go. Alright. This. Off. Okay. Sweet. Am I pirating games right now? Yes. Of course I'm pirating games right now. Am I pirating games right now? Yes. Of course I'm pirating games right now. Bro. Where's Gain, bro? Jesus. Yeah, Gain is all the way down. Alright, that's a lot better because this shit can get pretty bright. Of course I'm pirating games right now.